Welcome to InflexionPoint Podcast, where we cultivate change from the inside out as we ponder the Cairo question. Will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? We stand on the belief that dismantling racism goes beyond laws and legislation or politics and economics. Here, anti-racism activation is presented as an inside job where personal transformation and accountability impact social change. So take a seat at the anti-racism activation table with InflexionPoint Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the 2025 kickoff of InflexionPoint Podcast. We are dedicated to anti-racism activation and the art of listening in authentic conversation, engagement, and action. We challenge our audience to listen actively and intentionally for the purpose of critical self-reflection, in-depth perspective taking, personal transformation, and ultimately social impact. I am your host, Anita Russell, and here's a quick hello from co-hosts Mavis and Gail.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mavis Bauman.
Hi, I'm Gail Hunter, and Happy New Year.
Yes. Happy New Year. So if you've been following us throughout 2024, you know that we focus on the art of community conversation, particularly in today's climate of systemic and institutional racism and anti-racism activation, equity, diversity, inclusion, book banning, and so many other things. In 2025, we turn our attention towards community engagement and the grassroots of change. So throughout this year, we'll focus on stories and strategies and successes of community-driven movements that are making a difference. So each episode will focus on a little bit of theory, some practical examples, allowing our audience to gain insights that they can apply in real-world community engaging efforts. So throughout this season, we'll introduce case studies as well as guests who reflect community engagement in action. So Mavis and Gail, your thoughts on where we're going for this year?
Well, I'll say this is pretty exciting because this is where the rubber hits the road, right? We've all read a lot of books, we've talked a lot, and now we're about real concrete change. So I want to learn as much as anyone listening here. It's going to be exciting.
Excellent. Yeah. Gail?
Well, it is going to be exciting. And I've always said it, change has two major parts. One is awareness, because you have to have the awareness of what needs to change and consciously, and then we have to act on that. And so this is our action, right? This is learning what to do and how to take those steps to create that experience of that engagement. That's going to be exciting.
Excellent. So we're going to open up the conversation today under the umbrella of from talking to doing and empowering communities through engagement. Our central question is this: how do community conversations actually evolve into community engagement? So throughout the year, we'll be talking in depth about how that evolution actually happens. So we're going to get started today by navigating that spectrum of community interaction and the evolution from conversation to engagement. So if you take a look at community engagement and community conversation, you kind of get a sense that they're really, really closely related concepts, but they also differ in certain focus and the scope of the work that's being done. So we're going to start off with a breakdown of what some of those differences are. So in community conversation, it's kind of defined as a dialogue-based approach to discussing specific topics and concerns and ideas with members of the community. So last year, we talked a lot about this idea of authentic conversation, authentic listening, and all of that. Community conversation also has a focus on dialogue and understanding. But that understanding evolves from perspective taking, you being willing to kind of step out of who you are, your thoughts, your beliefs, and your ideas, and consider the thoughts, beliefs, and ideas of someone else, right? And so there's that focus on the dialogue, but it's also on understanding. And then the purpose is to exchange ideas and to listen to diverse perspectives and build mutual understanding. So some examples include informal gatherings to discuss neighborhood concerns, listening sessions on a single topic, such as a public safety or education or any other number of topics. It could also include facilitated discussions aimed at uncovering community needs. And for the most part, the outcome is around greater awareness, shared insights, and stronger interpersonal connection. So, Mavis, Gail, when you all think about community conversations, talk to me about what that looks and feels like to you from your own kind of experiences, and also including some of the things that we may have talked about last year.
Well, I know for myself, I mean, the nonprofit that I run and started, we've done quite a bit of that with community conversations. One of the programs that we had was called Food for the Soul, which is we invited people to come in and we provided soup and bread and we did some meditation. But we also came up with the topic of what we could talk about. And it was spiritually based. And so it was getting people to come in together to discover and explore and listen, most of all, to each other and what everybody else thought and feeling and belief was around the topic. We also do a trauma program called You Are Not Alone for trauma survivors of any kind of trauma that we meet monthly and get together to try to see what other people are experiencing and to try to provide a support system for them. Mm-hmm. And so we have programs, so we've been doing that, trying to go in the community. We also did a program before the pandemic, so we have to pick it back up again now. We went into a community in the city of Pittsburgh where we wanted to provide some education, some holistic education and provide different techniques and things that people could use to try to reduce feelings of depression or anxiety or reactions to certain traumas that they may have. And so we did that program. It was actually really successful. And it was, and we got to hear what people themselves from that community were experiencing and feeling and needing. And we had some speakers come, and it was a really positive experience. And so we'd like to kind of pick that up again and start doing that more. And so what we've talked about, there's so many different ideas and possibilities of what we can do.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gail. And just for our audience knowledge, I actually had the opportunity to work with Gail on that, a lot of the programs that she just described, particularly the one when we literally went in and had a community-based conversation that was very, very dynamic. So Mavis, I want to hear from you in terms of your some of your personal experiences with those community conversations.
Well, I guess I've been in a number of different communities, church communities, work communities, my nonprofit in Rwanda, being within that community. And just in case there are any introverts listening, I will just share that it can be difficult for me to be in community sometimes in large groups and hearing a lot of different perspectives, especially if there gets to be a little bit of tension in the room. But here's the other side of that. I have also noticed the deep connection that happens when you're in physical proximity to each other, when you're really looking into each other's eyes, really hearing each other and kind of sensing who each other is, watching body language, all those things that in a way seem to have been lost or at least pushed back during the time of COVID and the rise of social media. There is so much conversation that goes on without that community, without it being in the presence of community. An unknown person speaking to an unknown person is not community. So I just really want everybody to think about that. I'm thinking about it and how much more I, as an introvert, need community. need to be in the presence of other people and hear them directly. It's very reinforcing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you so much for sharing that. So one of the things that I'm hoping that our audience can see is that all three of us are very, very dedicated to doing this work. And the work that we do goes beyond just what we do on this podcast. So just wanted to kind of put that
right.
And so now let's kind of shift our conversation a little bit into the space of community engagement. And so we're talking about sort of moving from talking to doing. And that's really where the rubber begins to hit the road when it comes to how can we take these dynamic community conversations and convert them or evolve them into programs that engage people on a much deeper kind of level. So I'll go through the same kind of process and just kind of talk about the definition of focus and purpose and some examples and all of that. So community engagement is defined as the broad, active process of building relationships with community members to collaborate, address shared challenges, and achieve common goals. The focus is usually around actions and participation. So that's where it's kind of shifting from the conversational piece to the action piece, in that the focus is much more honed in on specific actions and participation of the members of the community. And then the purpose is to foster partnerships. So you can kind of see how engagement takes it to a whole other level. Now we're talking about fostering partnerships, we're talking about gathering input, and we're talking about driving meaningful change. And when I think about these types of terms, that's when it kind of brings me into this space of thinking about community engagement in terms of grassroots movements, right? Mm-hmm. Some examples include hosting workshops or town halls to address specific issues, volunteering or organizing community service projects is another example, developing collaborative programs with community stakeholders with the intended outcome of sustained involvement, shared decision-making, and tangible outcomes like policy changes, new initiatives, or improvements over what we currently have. So again, let's kind of take a look at who we are, the three of us, and some of the community engagement work that we have actually gotten involved in. So I'll start off by sharing, just a week or so ago, I did a community food, I was at a community food bank. And if you're familiar, anybody's listening, I'm from Pittsburgh, and one of the very historic Black communities in the city of Pittsburgh is the Hill District. So the food bank was organized with the Hill District CDC, the Community Development Corporation. And it was such a gratifying experience for me, number one, to kind of be in that engaging space. So when I think about that, it was the team members who came to do the volunteering. It was the team members who were a part of the organization who put the whole entire thing together. And more importantly, or most importantly, it was the community. It was the individuals who came and they shared in what we had to offer. So we had eggs and we had milk and we had cabbage and we had apples and we had carrots and oatmeal and all of this stuff. That we were there to engage the community, to present them with these gifts. And it was such an incredibly beautiful experience for me. And one of the high points of the experience was when a little boy came in. He might have been like about 10 years old or so. And he came in by himself. And he came in just saying, is it okay if I get some food for me and my grandma? So it was him, his grandma, and he also mentioned his little brother. And so, of course, we were like, yes, and asked him, well, do you live close by? Because he wouldn't have been able to carry everything by himself. And he said, well, let me just go see if I can go get my grandma. So then he leaves, comes back like maybe not more than like 5 or so minutes. and says, well, my grandma can't come. And I said, well, where do you live? And I realized that part of the issue was the fact that he did not live nearby. And so it would have been impossible for this little boy to take this box of food that we were offering him to take it home for his grandma. And so the way the story unfolded, other volunteers around heard what was going on and were trying to figure out how can we get this little boy his food and take it home to his grandma. And one of the volunteers stepped up and said, don't worry, I'll take you home. I will drive you to your grandma's. That was no more than about a 5-minute ride or something like that. But the beauty of it was the fact that we were there to serve the community. And it wasn't just having them come in and take a bag of food, takes a box of food. Some of it was about getting some little bit of an insight into their story. So here's this little kid that lives with his grandma and his little brother, and they came in for food that we were able to provide for them. To me, that's a beautiful example of community engagement. Mavis, Gail?
That really was a beautiful example of that. Yeah, that was incredible. And it's such a simple solution, right? And she just offered to drive them. But that was really wonderful.
Absolutely. There was no hesitation whatsoever. Like we have to figure out how we're going to get this kid home.
Right.
That's not that difficult, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And then if we're in community, we start to know each other.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, that sense that everyone is a stranger, especially in urban environments. If you aren't in proximity to each other, you don't know who your neighbors are. Mm-hmm. It's a strange phenomenon, but then the whole vibe changes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So talk to me, the two of you, about some of the experiences you had specifically with a community engagement effort.
Do you want to go, Gail? Because I've got a couple. I'm still trying to see what I want to do about.
Well, I'm trying to think if I had any difficulty with either one of them, and really didn't. They pretty much moved pretty smoothly through some things. Mm-hmm. The one that we did in the community of Manchester, out on the north side of Pittsburgh, we had a few issues just getting things set up and getting the people that we wanted to come and speak. But we did it. I had to share this icebreaker that we did. I don't even remember me, but it was an icebreaker that I found on YouTube from, I think it was in Denmark, that was first done. And it was where you had people, we all started out in the same place. And then I had signs around the auditorium. And they were, if anybody had, I grew up with one parent instead of two, moved to that space. If anybody had a sibling that was gay or LGBTQ+, go to that space. And different things that could have happened to us in our lifetime, over the course of our lifetime. And what began to happen was people started moving in groups, right? From one to the next. And all of a sudden, what may have appeared initially as more segregated groups that started out became totally mixed and totally integrated. And the people began to recognize and see as they were moving who they had similarities with and who they actually had familiarities with. And by the time that the exercise was over, it felt the energy in the whole room shifted. It was a big room, right? And it was a very empowering and very heartwarming experience to do that. And that's what I think you're talking about, is that what happens when we can get together and begin to communicate, begin to listen to each other and begin that engagement process, that we get to know one another and the barriers of fear get broken down and trust begins to get established. And anything is possible, right? As barriers are broken down, anything's possible.
Absolutely, Gail. Thank you. And again, I remember because I was with you and, part of the organizing team and all of that, put that whole thing together. And that was a beautiful experience. Mm-hmm. And I think when we got to the end of that particular exercise and people were kind of looking at each other like, oh, you had the same experience. Right. You had the same life event that I did. Right. So you're absolutely right in the way that it really, really brought conversation together in a much more engaging way. Right? So yeah, Mavis?
I was thinking about the element of service in community engagement, that you get the chance to kind of combine forces. You know how when you're in a community gathering, it sort of happens, organically, that you connect with another person in the room and you exchange a few words like, are you interested in that too? Yeah, me too. And then the meeting goes on and you find out you can come together and work together after that. You get that chance to serve, to have cross-fertilization of ideas and raise each other up in that way of service. And you're not alone. And your ideas, get put into action. I've been thinking about, I served at, and still do on occasion, at a soup kitchen in West Orange, New Jersey, that was begun by a friend of mine who believed that no matter who you are, you deserve a beautiful meal. So she never cooked with somebody's kind of leftovers. She designed a meal that she wanted to serve at a certain time and gave this whole community, I would say there'd usually be 60 to 100 people that would come, everything from salad to dessert. And I just learned so much from being in that environment, because we tend to think of like giving what we don't need to someone else who needs it. No, let's give our best. I learned, that from her, and her daughter has continued it and continues to serve the community. And it's really a beautiful, beautiful thing. And also, because I was in proximity to that community, there were people there who loved me and helped me understand more about homelessness, about joblessness, about things that I hadn't been exposed to directly. Maybe momentarily, but not directly. And one woman in particular was responding to a comment I had made about everybody having cell phones in that was coming there for food. And I thought, well, that's strange. And she took me back and said, you don't know their story. Somebody could have lent them that phone. And it changed me in that moment. It changed me from having, it just busted any sort of judgmental thought. And so again, being in that community and serving and learning as I served was a blessing. And a lot of people got full bellies, Christmas presents, the whole thing.
And the whole idea is just kind of extending off of what you just said, is being in a place of not making assumptions about people and not looking at, like, you see somebody with a cell phone. I kind of think that would be something that they would need to have if you're in a homeless kind of situation.
Right. You're right. This was a few years ago in my defense, but you're right. You're right. They do need a phone.
Yeah. There are people who might kind of look at it through that lens. Well, if you can't afford this, how can you afford that? But the truth is exactly right. Like, you and I might have this type of plan when it comes to our cell phone, but there's other types of plans that are a lot more affordable and specifically designed to be more affordable, so that they're not kind of left out, so to speak. Like, I totally understand where you're coming from and everything. And so when I think about my experience at the food bank, was very similar situations. Like, you see people and they're just coming in, and there were older people, there were younger people. And, there might be some individuals who could look at that and say, well, you look pretty young and able-bodied. Why are you coming to a food bank to get some food?
Oh, no.
And you hit the nail right on its head.
You don't know.
You don't know my story. That's the importance of community conversation. That's the importance of sharing our narratives and sharing our history and sharing our story so that I can have a conversation with you and take anything that I may have as a preconceived notion or idea or belief and just tuck it away somewhere.
Right, right. And, you know, Anita, it even goes further back than that, because I think sometimes people make judgments about it before they even try to get in community and do something. They'll say, this won't make any difference, you know? Why, the old bootstraps article, why can't they just get up and help themselves? But being in the community, being of service and learning more about each other is a huge blessing. Changes who you are in the world.
It's letting go of the judgment that we often can activate, right? Of other and self too. And letting go of that and listening, hearing, being open to wanting to know. Easy compassion.
So there's a little bit of an extension story to what I was sharing earlier about my experience at the food bank. So the food bank only goes into a certain period of time. And when that period of time is over, there's nobody else in the line and all of that, we found ourselves with food left over. So now the question is, what do we do with this food? So in that process, other people stepped up. Well, I have seniors in my building, so I'll take some over to my building, right? I have a connection to this organization over there, so I can take some over there as well. For me, it was my church. So I got on the phone and I called my pastor and I explained to him that, we're at this food bank, we've distributed, there's nobody else here, but we have food left over. Can I bring it to the church so that we can package it up and everything so that when our church members come on Sunday, this was on Friday when we did it, our church members can come on Sunday and we can tell them there's bags of food downstairs. So it was a multi-phase, if you will, multifaceted story and the way that it unfolded over the course of the day. And we were able to give away all of the food at the end of the day. And that also included us as the volunteers. We were able to bring stuff home. So Jerome and I brought potatoes and onions and stuff like that, and proceeded to cut things up to prepare so that we could have this over the course of several days. And so the beauty of it was the engagement piece was about everybody coming into this space, right? So I'm going to stop right there because we do have to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll continue our conversation about community engagement. So welcome back to Inflection Point Podcast and our kickoff episode for 2025. Our topic of discussion is From Talking to Doing, Empowering Communities Through Engagement. So we're kind of having this conversation about the evolution from community conversation and talking and dialogue into community engagement. And so it's going from talking to doing. So let's kind of dig a little bit deeper into that and think about how do those things complement one another, the community conversation and community engagement, because they really are very intimately related to one another. So let's talk about that a little bit. So when you think about a community conversation, it can be a key component of community engagement. So the example that you gave, Gail, was a perfect example of a community conversation that evolved into, while we were in that space, it really evolved into community engagement. And the way that you described, by the end of that initial activity, people were engaging with one another in a very different kind of way. Because if you recall, originally we were all sitting in the chairs, right, and then we got up and we're walking around. That is when we kind of moved into this space of engagement. And so community engagement often facilitates those ongoing conversations to ensure that whatever actions come out of it are aligned with the community needs and the values, right? And so it's about laying the foundation for the engagement, right? And so when I think about the how I got into the food bank, it was really based on a conversation that I had with someone. And during that conversation, she reached out to me. It was a conversation over text. And she reached out to me and asked me if I would be willing to volunteer because the organization needed more volunteers for that day. And so in that way, that conversation served as a starting point for me to kind of move into a space of understanding that community, what its needs are, and what is the aspirations of the community developed, the CDC in the Hill District. So it wasn't just about me being there. It was about all of the stuff that I was enveloped with by being there, right? And so the community engagement piece kind of builds on those insights that come out of the conversation by turning the ideas and the concerns into actionable plans and collaborative initiative.
Mm-hmm.
Comments?
Right. Right. I guess I'd like to share a live example. All three of us, to varying degrees, are part of the Along Talk community. Along Talk was started by a couple of fellows, Kyle Williams and Kamal Carter, mostly out of concern for their kids. They're Black families growing up in community, their children very talented in sports and being faced with racism on their campuses. So Kyle Williams started with just a conversation with his son's coach. And out of that conversation came a whole lot of other conversations. This coach was very willing to reach out to other coaches. And the idea of learning about what the real issues of racism were was shared through many high schools and colleges at this point, and through over 700 community conversations. Now, those community conversations happen online right now. So anyone in the country can become involved. Just go to along.talk.com, and there's a place to register for the next community conversation. But what I love about Along Talk is they are turning it into concrete action in so many ways. For example, Martha's Vineyard is a little bit of their crucible, where they're trying different tacks with different leaders in Martha's Vineyard, the school board, and different people of influence to see how they can really push through the idea of interrupting racism, eracism, promoting anti-racism. Along Talk has this, kind of a tagline, which is a goal really to put an anti-racist at every dinner table. They have really simple ways that people can engage with anti-racism discussions. But they are, like I say, they've reached out to so many colleges and individuals. There are about 21,000 people now part of the Along Talk community in just 4 years, which is amazing. 4 years, people have heard so many extraordinary perspectives on racism that you cannot forget them. At least I got to say for myself, I was so compelled to act and to, this was who I wanted to be. You learn that much that you become excited about it. So we are in the phase where we're in becoming involved in different concrete ways. For example, we have our podcast. That's one way to reach out. We are reaching out to other people in similar environments. And little by little, all of these different conversations are knitting people together, and the education that we're able to get out there is increasing, and it's exciting. I mean, that's the nature of grassroots, right? But anyway, just watching a long talk grow, and how much, Gail was talking about awareness, but caring about the subject matter is so important, and it's such fuel. What do you care about that is impacting your community that you can draw on to make change? One of the examples that Kyle uses, when you think about like, how can we get rid of racism? He talks about it as a cultural change. Like 15 years ago, we might have been on a plane and had people smoking around us. It's just inconceivable now. Not only have they changed the rules, but our minds have changed about it. So this is one of the concrete things that I think a long talk is achieving, changing the way you think about things, the way you are able to respond when you're in the presence of people who are saying racist things. It's really powerful. It's really powerful stuff. So they are really in engagement stage in so many ways. Kyle's go ahead, Anita.
I'm really glad you brought up a long talk, because they are like the perfect example of kind of from that conversational space, like what you described with where they were online and the Zoom meetings and the CPR protocol and all of that stuff into delivering and facilitating anti-racism activation workshops at colleges, universities, as well as businesses. And so they really blossomed from where they started off. And there's a few other things that I wanted to mention in terms of how the community conversation and the engagement complement one another. And so one of the things that is evident when you look at the progress of a long talk is along the way, they were building trust and relationships.
Good.
So you got community, you mentioned Martha's Vineyard, you got the community online, but as they began to branch out and go into these other spaces, they brought with them this idea of building trust and relationships. And so the conversation within that context provides that space for people to share their stories, voice their concerns, and connect with others in this non-threatening type of environment. So in that sense, the community engagement deepens those connections by encouraging that collaborative action. That's what they're doing. They're encouraging this collaborative action between themselves and these university communities, right? Sharing in decision-making. Somebody at the university had to make a decision that we're bringing a long talk workshop into our space.
Right.
There's that decision-making process and the co-ownership of that.
Yes,
again,
that's
that would not have been possible without those various universities, colleges, and organizations buying into what they were presenting, right?
And just to add to that, many of the teams at these colleges have decided that anyone who wants to join the team has to go through a long talk first. Now, to me, that is so awesome, because young people are sharing it with other young people, and they're going to learn how to be in the world together differently. And change is going to happen, and it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be beautiful change. I didn't know you could smoke here. I didn't think that there was,
Well, they're educating themselves. They're providing with education, right? They're increasing conscious awareness, which is what happened with smoking, right? And more people started quitting smoking, and the more people started quitting smoking, the more they had non-tolerance for, zero tolerance for anybody smoking. And so that's exactly the path that this can take too. And that's what he's doing. That's what he's doing with a long talk, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
But it starts with that education and conscious awareness. And that happens with the community conversations. And that's what then what follows is the engagement. Yeah. Right. And the social engagement for any situation, you have to feel a sense of safety and security, right? And so it starts with that development of trust. Yeah.
Yeah, that is really
Kind
important.
of being honest and developing that trust. Yeah.
There are white people, Black people, all kinds of people in the same Zoom room who know they can speak and say something that might be completely wrong, and they will be dealt with appropriately,
respectfully,
and lovingly. Like, here's the deal. Kyle often gives examples, and they are just crystal clear. What is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the next sort of concept, if you will, that kind of connects community conversation and community engagement is informing action. The community conversation kind of offers a platform to gather information, gather feedback, listen to these diverse perspectives, uncover those underlying issues that may not immediately be available. So when I listen or when I read those words and I hear myself speaking those words, again, it takes me back to Kyle Williams when he had that initial conversation with the basketball coach.
Yes.
In terms of helping the coach understand that there was a line that was crossed, and his sons, meaning Kyle's sons, were impacted in a negative way. And what Kyle was literally saying was, "What are you going to do about it?" And he stepped up.
Yes,
he did step up, and so that is what sort of opened up to be able to have those initial conversations. And it went from that into now we got these Zoom conversations that are happening, right? And then into this bigger platform. But that initial conversation is what drove the whole entire thing.
Yes.
Yeah, one person, a Black father.
One person.
Yes, talking to a sports athletic coach. Talk about different perspectives, but they were able to come together in spite of those different perspectives. And I think lastly, there's this idea of encouraging inclusivity. That's another thing that is demonstrated by the work that Kyle and Kamal have done, is this encouraging inclusivity. You cannot be Your voice can't be heard if you're not including in certain spaces where your voice needs to be heard.
Yes,
exactly.
Yes.
Right? And so
yes, absolutely.
And creates the opportunity for those marginalized voices to be heard. That is exactly what happened with Kyle and that initial conversation with the coach. His voice was heard, and it fostered a different sense of belonging and inclusion in the mind of the coach.
Yeah.
Which became the impetus for what followed. Now you've got all of this decision making, right? Now you've got this process implementation. And so that's the beauty of the conversation when it evolves into engagement, the community engagement piece. Thoughts?
Well, the key piece with the coach and Kyle is that the coach had to listen, right? The coach had to be willing to listen to hear what Kyle was saying without judging, but just really open up and listen with compassion. And he did, right? And because that's what then starts to build that trust. And you have to have that trust in order to create that engagement and the next steps that follow.
Absolutely.
And the interesting thing is that that was not Kyle's intention when he talked to the coach.
Right.
He just had to manage the tension in the air for his son. And so we need to keep our minds open to the possibility of change too, and think about it. What was that, Gail?
It could be more than what you go into.
It could be more. It could be that people you wouldn't even think about talking to on a particular subject. If we stay silent, it seems like, in this country, even if we stay silent, we're just seething. We're not changing anything. We're not learning. We're not coming together. And so, he's just a perfect example of, I'm going to say it out loud.
Well, and this silence is a guarantee that nothing will change.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well put.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great example.
Yeah.
Alone is a great example of that
Yeah.
evolution from
Right. Of what can change, what can happen.
exactly from conversation to engagement.
Right.
So we're sort of running out of time, but I think we might have some time to mention one particular organization other than a long talk. And it's an organization, I'm not familiar with them in the sense that I've never done any work with them. But when I was doing the research to put this episode together and the content and everything, this organization really, really caught my eye, right? I'm just going to sort of read a little bit about what this organization is about. The name of the organization is Until We Are All Free. So just let that title even sink in.
Yeah.
So the seeds of Until We Are All Free were planted by the leaders of Culture Strike and Power California, then known as Mobilize the Immigrant Vote. The Black Alliance for Just Immigration came on as a partner in early 2015. So, as in many other critical and social justice interventions, the impetus for this intersectional initiative was born out of a shared desire to step into a visionary future of dignity and self-determination in the face of an unjust status quo. That's a lot packed in there in what I just read. And when you think about organizations, and that's part of what we really want to do this year, is really highlight those organizations that are doing the work, that grassroots work, right? Because whenever I think about grassroots, there's a couple of things that come to mind. Like there's a poem that Tupac Shakur had written years ago, and I don't remember the exact title, but it's about a rose growing out of the concrete, right? Yeah. And I had a conversation with my husband where he was telling me a story about, I believe it was a Chinese woman who was growing things in the space where she lived. It was a concrete space. But in the spaces between the concrete blocks, she was actually planting seeds.
Wow.
Planting seeds.
Yeah.
Those seeds began to flourish.
Wow.
And it was what was happening beneath the surface because the roots were growing and the roots were spreading. And the same thing with in the poem when Tupac talks about the rose, right? But that rose, nor those other plants that the woman had planted, would not have been able to grow without the roots. The roots is what brought that life that was evident. Now people can see, oh my God, look at this rose growing out of the concrete. Look at these plants and these vegetables and things growing out of the concrete because of the effort that was below the surface. And I feel like that's where we are right now. There's so much work being done below the surface because
creating that root, right? Yeah.
This is the work that gets done by people that I don't need to be in the limelight. I don't need to get a lot of likes. I don't need this. I don't need that. I need to get the work done.
Yeah.
All right.
That's what grassroots is all about. We're going to spend the remainder of this entire year talking about that engagement, the conversations we talked a lot about last year, but the engagement and the grassroots that emerge from all of that. Right? So we're down to about 5 more minutes left on our on this particular episode. So I wanted to close out with this quote, and this quote actually comes from Until We Are All Free. And the quote is, in revisiting the journey of Power California within the Until All Are Free initiative, we can see that cultural strategy, when done well, transforms us from the inside out. I love that part of the quote because my book, Cultivating Change from the Inside.
Yeah.
So the rest of the quote goes on to say, in its goal to transform culture at the societal level for justice, cultural strategy helps us transform our organizations at all levels, from strategy to programs to relationships. That's what we're doing here.
Sorry.
That's what we're doing here. All three of us are doing.
Yeah.
The platform that we're on, Transformation Talk Radio.
Exactly. Yeah.
We're doing. This is what we're doing for. It's all this grassroots movement happening below the surface.
It has to.
And I just encourage people to think about how they can be involved in things that are happening beneath the surface. It doesn't need to be a big thing.
No.
It can be small acts that strengthen those roots or bring a skill to a particular team that they don't have. It's so easy to be overwhelmed by the need in the world and all that. And sometimes it's not easy, but it is so very important.
Absolutely.
And, as citizens, as Americans, everything we do for our country is important for our fellow men and women's. It's important.
Absolutely. So we're going to, as we always do, relate this back to that core question. Will Cairo have to fight in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? And that question is based on our collective personal accountability and how we define ourselves as members of society, as leaders, and as learners, right? We all have a role to play. And the key is transformative community engagement. So everybody out there who is listening, ask yourself this question: what am I going to do to ensure that Cairo is a 4-year-old little boy, and his future is in our hands? And for him and his contemporaries to have that right, that self-determination and all of that, and to peacefully exist in that skin. So that's our challenge to our audience, to really kind of think about where you are in all of this. So we want to thank you for joining us on our opening episode of Inflection Point Podcast here on Transformation Talk Radio. We are here every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time and 6 p.m. Eastern time as we continue our community conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. The journey towards anti-racism and social change doesn't stop here. Truth, reconciliation, and healing come from ongoing, open, honest, and deliberate conversations. Continue to dive in and deconstruct your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs as we band together to manifest social change. Tune in to Inflection Point Podcast every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more conversations about how we can cultivate change from the inside out.